We were invincible the day the humans arrived. I remember it with perfect clarity, the way our war fleets blotted out the twin suns above the capital, their hulls shimmering like blades drawn across the sky. 1,000 conquered worlds paid tribute to us. 1,000 species bent their knees when our envoys spoke. Our empire did not negotiate. We dictated, we consumed, we endured. And then humanity requested an audience. They did not come with dreadnoughts or ultimata. They arrived in a vessel so modest our scanners nearly dismissed it as civilian debris. Its hull bore scars of long travel. Its engines were efficient, not formidable. Their delegation disembarked without ceremony, small, soft-bodied beings wrapped in fabrics rather than armor. I was present in the grand convocation chamber when they first addressed us. As High Archivist, it was my duty to record the subjugation of new species. I prepared the formal language of compliance. Instead, their ambassador bowed. Bowed. He spoke not of surrender, nor of resistance. He offered assistance. Medical fleets, he said, agricultural technologies, atmospheric stabilizers for polluted worlds. Mutual survival, he called it. The chamber erupted in restrained amusement. Our admirals did not bother to mute their laughter. One leaned toward me and whispered, "They mistake us for the desperate." Kindness in our doctrine was camouflage for weakness. Empires rose through fear, not generosity. We had proven this across centuries of conquest. Power extracted obedience. Compassion invited exploitation. Yet the humans did not retract their offer when mocked. They did not bristle at insult. They simply transmitted detailed proposals, open access schematics, shared patents, invitations for joint scientific councils. Their data was transparent, their intentions disarming. We dismissed them. Officially, we categorized humanity as a minor emergent species with negligible military relevance. I recorded the notation myself. But they did not retreat to their home system in humiliation. They went to our borders. The outer systems we had strip-mined and abandoned were the first to report human activity. Relief ships entered orbit over worlds whose oceans we had drained for isotopes. Portable fusion grids replaced failing reactors we had deemed unprofitable to repair. Human engineers worked alongside local populations without demanding tribute. When informed, our governors scoffed. "Let them waste their resources," they said. "Altruism is expensive." And yet, reports continued. Piracy declined in sectors where human patrol craft operated. Famine indices dropped on 3 vassal planets within a single cycle. Infrastructure and neglected systems began to stabilize, faster than our projections deemed possible. Still, we laughed. In the assembly, our admirals openly questioned human naivety. "What do you seek in return?" they demanded in a subsequent session. The human ambassador answered with infuriating calm, "A future in which none of us stand alone." It was a statement so absurd within imperial doctrine that several counselors requested clarification. None was given. The humans simply continued their work. Then the whispers began. Minor species long loyal to our banner began referencing human assistance in their trade communications. Merchant guilds quietly adjusted routes to include Earth ports. Academic institutions requested exchange programs. I observed the trend with professional detachment. Influence, after all, did not equate to authority. We possessed fleets, we possessed weapons capable of rendering continents into glass. But influence is a subtler currency. A year after first contact, I attended a regional economics summit on Carith Prime, a vassal world dependent on our agricultural shipments. I expected routine affirmations of loyalty. Instead, their planetary governor thanked us for historical protection before announcing new sustainability initiatives developed in partnership with human agronomists. The chamber applauded, not us. I returned to the capital unsettled, though I could not yet articulate why. The empire remained intact, tribute flowed, our borders held, until they did not. The first refusal came from Fesca Minor, an unremarkable mining colony along our outer rim. Their tribute shipment, refined iridium and labor conscripts, was scheduled for standard collection. Our transport vessels entered orbit to silence. No docking clearance, no ceremonial delegation, only a transmission. I was summoned to decode it personally. The Planetary Council of Thesca Minor expressed gratitude for centuries of imperial governance before declaring their intent to suspend tribute obligations, effective immediately. Their reasoning was concise. With humanitarian and infrastructural support from the United Earth Coalition, our production deficits have been stabilized. We no longer require imperial subsidies for survival. Therefore, we assert autonomous resource management. Autonomous. The word pulsed in the chamber like a fracture line spreading through crystal. Our admirals were furious. They demanded immediate punitive action. An example must be made. Yet what chilled me was not their defiance. It was the tone of the message. There was no anger, no rebellion rhetoric, only calm certainty. They were not overthrowing us. They simply no longer needed us. The Emperor himself dismissed the incident as an anomaly, a single system intoxicated by foreign novelty, he declared. Crush it and the fever will pass. And so the order was prepared. As High Archivist, I recorded the directive for corrective intervention. But when I reviewed the wider reports that night, I noticed something I could not ignore. Thesca Minor was not alone in reducing tribute shipments. 2 other outer systems had quietly delayed transfers, citing administrative restructuring. In the corridors of power, the laughter had grown thinner. We told ourselves an empire cannot fall to kindness. We believed fear was eternal. But as our fleet engines ignited for Thesca Minor, I found myself staring at a projection of the human ambassador's final words in the assembly. A future in which none of us stand alone. For the first time in my centuries of service, I wondered, what if strength did not mean what we thought it did? And what if we had already allowed something far more dangerous than a fleet to take root within our borders? Empires do not fear armies. They fear ideas. I did not understand this when the first human envoys embedded themselves within our outer systems. At the time, I believed them to be misplaced idealists, soft creatures wandering into the shadow of a machine that had devoured civilizations long before their species discovered fire. They did not build fortresses. They built clinics. They did not establish garrisons. They established councils. On Virelia, a drought-stricken agri-world we had long ago stripped of its orbital mirrors, human engineers worked alongside native technicians to reconstruct atmospheric condensers. They shared schematics freely. No patents, no extraction contracts. When Virelia's harvest yields doubled within a single cycle, the humans requested only data, so others might replicate the process. On Thesca Minor, before our fleet could arrive, human advisors had already helped local leaders restructure resource distribution. Not rebellion, not sedition, simply efficiency. I read the intelligence briefs in growing silence. Piracy rates declined by 32% in sectors patrolled by joint human-local defense flotillas. The humans trained planetary militias in cooperative tactics, small adaptive formations rather than centralized command structures. Shared defense strategies, the reports called them. Shared. The word irritated our admirals. Famine, once a reliable lever of compliance, evaporated in 3 former dependency zones. Human agricultural modules, compact, self-sustaining biodomes, rendered tribute grain shipments unnecessary. Entire populations that had once relied on our logistical mercy no longer did. Our economists warned of revenue instability. Our generals warned of ideological contamination. But it was morale that unsettled me most. Species under our governance had long accepted hierarchy as natural law. We were stronger, therefore we ruled. This principle required no justification beyond history. Humans questioned it openly. In recorded forums across the Outer Rim, human representatives spoke of dignity, not as reward, but as inherent state. They encouraged local leaders to draft charters outlining citizen rights. They taught conflict mediation techniques that reduced reliance on military enforcement. They did all of this without denouncing us. That was the most infuriating part. When asked about the empire during a broadcast on Kareth Prime, a human diplomat answered carefully, "Every civilization evolves. We hope to be partners in that evolution." Partners, not conquerors, not liberators, partners. Our propaganda ministries responded swiftly. Holographic campaigns depicted humans as subtle manipulators, predators cloaked in benevolence. We leaked falsified reports suggesting exploitative trade clauses hidden in their agreements. The humans answered by publishing every contract publicly, every clause, every data exchange. Open networks allowed any citizen of any system to audit their activities. Independent journalists, species we had long tolerated but never empowered, were invited aboard human vessels to document operations. Transparency disarmed accusation. When our admirals threatened sanctions against systems collaborating with Earth, humans did not retaliate. They did not mobilize fleets. They simply continued delivering medical supplies to plague-ridden colonies, some of which had publicly criticized them days prior. Our threats began to look excessive. In the Grand Convocation Chamber, I observed something I had never witnessed in centuries of imperial governance: hesitation. A mid-tier counselor, one whose family line traced back to our earliest conquests, rose during a strategic session and spoke words that chilled the hall. "Loyalty maintained through fear," he said carefully, "is loyalty that evaporates when fear falters." Silence followed. The emperor's gaze hardened. The counselor was escorted from the chamber before he could elaborate. Official records state he retired due to health concerns. Unofficially, he vanished. Yet his words lingered in my mind like a fracture beneath polished stone, because fear was faltering. Not dramatically, not with rebellion banners or armed insurgencies, but subtly. Merchant guilds began negotiating directly with human trade networks, citing improved margins. Academic institutions requested joint symposiums with Earth universities. Even our own junior bureaucrats accessed human public archives, disguised as research. The contagion was not violent, it was aspirational. I traveled incognito to Varelia to observe the situation firsthand. I expected to find signs of indoctrination, human flags raised above government buildings, seditious slogans painted in public squares. Instead, I found something more destabilizing: normalcy. Markets thrived, crime rates had fallen, citizens spoke of long-term planning rather than immediate survival. When I inquired about imperial authority, local officials responded with polite acknowledgement of historical contributions. Historical, as though we were already past tense. A human engineer recognized my species immediately. He did not flinch. He did not display resentment. "You're welcome to review the condensers," he said. "We publish maintenance protocols openly." No hostility, no fear. I had never been addressed by a subordinate species before trembling before. It unsettled me more than defiance would have. Upon returning to the capital, I submitted my findings with clinical precision. I did not include my unease. But unease spread regardless. Our intelligence divisions compiled a projection matrix. If current trends continued, outer rim dependence on imperial infrastructure would decrease by 40% within 5 cycles. 40%. That was not rebellion. That was redundancy. In a closed session, an admiral pounded his fist against the obsidian table. "They weaken us without firing a shot," he growled. Yet another advisor, quiet, analytical, posed a question that fractured the room. "If we strike humanitarian vessels, how will it appear?" The image formed in every mind simultaneously. Our warships, their humanitarian vessels, predator and healer suspended in the same void. The propaganda division offered no reassuring scenario. Still, the emperor insisted on resolve.
Compassion is a luxury afforded by the secure. We are secure. But were we? 3 cycles later, the announcement arrived. Outer Rim Systems' Lethera, Jinxel, and Morvain, long compliant tributaries, issued synchronized declarations, not secession, cooperative treaties. They would maintain formal Imperial membership while entering mutual development compacts with the United Earth Coalition. The phrasing was meticulous, respectful, legally irrefutable. Our fleets could not justify invasion without exposing insecurity. Our diplomats could not invalidate agreements whose terms were publicly accessible and mutually beneficial. They had not left us, yet, but they had opened doors beyond us. In the archival chamber that night, I replayed the synchronized broadcasts. Citizens of 3 worlds stood beside human envoys, not kneeling, not defiant, simply equal. The word echoed through my consciousness like distant thunder. Equal. For the first time in Imperial history, our supremacy was not challenged by force. It was questioned by example. And as I recorded the treaties into our annals, I realized something far more dangerous than rebellion had begun. A species that offers hope does not need to conquer. It only needs to wait. The word yet appeared repeatedly in our internal analyses. They have not seceded yet. They have not mobilized yet. They have not unified against us yet. Each repetition tightened around my thoughts like a constricting coil. Empires are not toppled in a day. They erode, and erosion is patient. As I sealed the archival entry for the 3 treaties, a final intelligence alert flashed across my console. 5 additional systems had requested preliminary discussions with Earth. No declarations, no rebellion, just inquiries, just possibilities. The contagion had taken root, and for the first time in my long service to an empire that had never known fear, I felt it.
The first tremor did not come from the frontier. It came from the markets. I was reviewing quarterly tribute projections when the numbers refused to align. Iridium yields from Tesca Minor had dropped by 19%. Grain imports from Varelia were down by nearly half. Energy tariffs from 3 mid-rim systems had been renegotiated under local sustainability initiatives. Sustainability? A word we once dismissed as primitive idealism had begun appearing in official imperial ledgers. Our economists labeled it fluctuation, temporary volatility caused by experimental reforms. But fluctuations do not ripple inward toward the core. Within 2 cycles, noble houses dependent on outer rim extraction reported liquidity shortages. Shipyards slowed production. Luxury imports declined. Even the capital's atmospheric filtration budget required revision. The empire had not been struck. It had been bypassed. Emergency convocation was declared. I entered the grand chamber beneath vaulted ceilings etched with scenes of ancient conquest. Holographic projections of declining revenue streams rotated above the central dais like wounds refusing to clot. The aristocracy demanded blood. "Annihilate one of them," Lord Vethrin snarled, his tendrils trembling with indignation. "Burn a human-allied world to its crust. Fear will recalibrate the equation." Several admirals voiced agreement. They cited historical precedent. Swift brutality restored order. It always had. But then the analysts spoke. Humanity, they explained, had woven itself into interstellar supply chains with meticulous subtlety. Their agricultural modules supported food exports from neutral systems. Their open-source energy grids stabilized trade hubs beyond our borders. Their medical technologies were licensed freely to independent polities. Strike a human-allied world, and we risk destabilizing half the quadrant's commerce. Strike Earth itself, and neutral powers reliant on human infrastructure may perceive us as existential threat. Silence thickened. For the first time, retaliation carried consequence beyond immediate terror. We adjourned without resolution. Meanwhile, stories spread. A transport convoy caught at an unexpected orbital storm above Lathara suffered catastrophic shield failure. Human medics aboard the relief ship Mercy's Reach remained planetside when evacuation orders were issued, choosing to stabilize alien patients rather than secure their own departure. 3 perished when atmospheric collapse ruptured the clinic dome. The footage leaked before our sensors intercepted it. Another tale followed. During a reactor malfunction on Morvain, human engineers relinquished emergency shuttle seats to local technicians, staying behind to manually vent plasma conduits. They survived, but only barely. These narratives circulated through civilian networks faster than our suppression algorithms could contain them. They inspired imitation. On Kareth Prime, student groups organized volunteer brigades to assist in infrastructure repairs without awaiting Imperial authorization. Merchant guilds petitioned for independent trade talks with Earth, citing efficiency gains. In the capital itself, murmurs reached my archival corridors. Young scholars questioned why innovation required coercion. Junior officers debated whether strength must always manifest as domination. Questioned, debated. Such words were foreign to our political vocabulary. I felt something unfamiliar tightening within me. Doubt. Not in our military capacity. Our fleets remained unmatched in raw destructive power, but in the permanence of obedience. An empire endures through controlled scarcity and calibrated fear. Humanity was dismantling both without deploying a single warship. The Emperor could not allow hesitation to metastasize. At last, authorization was granted for a limited punitive strike. The target, Jinxel's moon colony, an openly human-aligned industrial hub that had broadcast repeated praise for Earth's cooperative initiatives. The objective, decisive demonstration. I recorded the directive with steady appendages, though my internal rhythms felt irregular. The fleet mobilized swiftly. Orbital defenses were neutralized within minutes. Surface installations were reduced to molten slag. Resistance was negligible. It was, by every traditional metric, a success. Cities burned. Transmission arrays collapsed in cascades of light. From the capital's observation deck, the holographic projection of the assault unfolded in silent brilliance. Admirals nodded with satisfaction. Fear, one murmured, recalibrated. But something was wrong. The planetary governor of Jinxel did not transmit pleas for mercy. Instead, a live feed from the surface emerged through civilian channels before we could suppress it. Human hospital ships entering orbit. White holes unmarred with weapon ports. Emergency broadcast frequencies filled with triage instructions in multiple languages. Medics descending through smoke-choked skies when our cruisers still hovered above the atmosphere. They did not fire upon us. They did not issue threats. They landed. Across the galaxy, citizens watched 2 images simultaneously. Our warships, angular, imposing, engines glowing like coals of annihilation. Their relief vessels, sleek, luminous, dispatching rescue shuttles into the ruins we created. Outrage did not erupt as armed rebellion. It erupted as condemnation. Neutral polities issued formal protests. Trade partners suspended negotiations. Even loyal systems requested clarification of proportionality. Proportionality, as though conquest required moral accounting. In the assembly, the Emperor declared the strike a necessary assertion of sovereignty. Yet outside the chamber, in public networks beyond our total control, comparisons multiplied. Analysts juxtaposed footage of devastation with scenes of human medics treating alien children beneath collapsed infrastructure. The contrast was devastating. We had intended to restore fear. Instead, we amplified admiration for our rival. And still, humanity did not retaliate militarily. Their fleets did not mobilize for vengeance. Their admirals did not issue ultimatums. They sent more hospital ships. They requested ceasefire corridors, not for strategic repositioning, but for evacuation. That refusal to escalate unbalanced our doctrine entirely. How do you deter an enemy who declines to become one? In the cycles following the strike, tribute shipments declined further. Merchant guilds cited
ethical risk assessments in contract renegotiations. Student protests erupted on two core worlds, small, swiftly dispersed, yet symbolically unprecedented. I attended a closed council session where projections were displayed in grim red trajectories. The throne remained intact, but the cracks were visible. Revenue instability, legitimacy erosion, growing external sympathy for humanity's model. The emperor's voice, once resonant with absolute certainty, carried an undercurrent of strain. "We will not be undone by sentiment," he insisted. Yet sentiment was reshaping the battlefield. As High Archivist, I began compiling a restricted chronicle, an internal account of these developments separate from official propaganda. Because history, I had come to understand, is not determined solely by those who wield weapons. It is shaped by those who shape belief. At the final cycle of that quarter, I received a consolidated report from Outer Rim monitoring stations. Demonstrations had occurred on 3 additional worlds, not violent but symbolic, citizens lighting candles in memory of Jinxel's dead. Candles against an empire of plasma cannons. I watched Thorthwardings in silence. The throne still stood. Our fleet still commanded the void. But something foundational had shifted. We had displayed power. They had displayed humanity. And across the galaxy, countless eyes were deciding which was stronger. As I sealed the archive entry for the Jinxel strike, a final update arrived. 2 mid-rim governors had requested policy re-evaluation consultations with Earth representatives. Not secession, not yet, but the stone beneath the throne was no longer solid. It was fracturing, and fractures, once begun, do not mend themselves.
We prepared for war. After Jinxel burned, our fleets fortified every major jump corridor. Defense platforms were rearmed, conscription quotas increased. The capital's orbital ring shimmered with newly activated shield arrays. We expected retaliation. We expected human dreadnoughts emerging from hyperspace in righteous fury. Instead, they sent more hospital ships. At first, we believed it a feint. Intelligence predicted eventual escalation. No species absorbs such destruction without striking back. But escalation never came. Relief convoys multiplied across the Outer Rim. Coordinated humanitarian fleets entered not only Jinxel, but neighboring systems destabilized by refugee influx. Human supply chains expanded with unnerving efficiency. Civilian transports were refitted as evacuation carriers. Independent media networks, many beyond our censorship reach, broadcast continuous testimonies from survivors. We attempted to frame the narrative. Human negligence invited imperial correction, our official channels declared. Unauthorized alliances destabilized regional order. The humans responded not with counteraccusation, but with grief. I watched, unsettled, as Earth's Secretary General stood before a chamber filled with representatives from dozens of species. Behind her flickered images of Jinxel's ruins. "We mourn," she said simply, "not as factions, as lives lost. No condemnation, no threats, only mourning." She read the names of the dead, alien names, one by one. Our propaganda algorithms faltered. Revenge would have validated our doctrine. Anger would have justified further suppression. But sorrow? Sorrow made our strike appear monstrous. Across neutral systems, vigils were held, not in protest of humanity's aggression, but in memory of victims of imperial fire. For centuries, we had maintained moral authority through inevitability. We were strong, therefore our actions were justified. Now, strength looked callous. Compassion looked courageous. Internal dissent intensified. Governors on resource-critical worlds quietly delayed enforcement of increased tribute quotas. Logistical complications, they claimed, infrastructure strain. Military officers requested clarification before executing new intimidation patrols. Some cited civilian safety concerns. Desertions began, not in dramatic mutinies, but in quiet absences. A patrol frigate failing to report for duty, a logistics officer transferring to a neutral trade commission, a squadron commander retiring unexpectedly. Unthinkable once. Now, explainable. The most disturbing phenomenon, however, was not rebellion. It was silence. No banners of revolution rose above planetary capitals, no fleets defected en masse, there were no dramatic declarations of independence. There was simply withdrawal. Systems initiated administrative restructuring. Tribute shipments were recalculated. Resource allocations were temporarily redirected to local stabilization initiatives. The language was precise, legal, respectful, defiant only in implication. In the corridors of the capital, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations ceased when certain officials approached. Data streams were encrypted beyond standard protocol. Young bureaucrats no longer recited imperial doctrine with reflexive conviction. They spoke of efficiency, of sustainability, of long-term resilience. Human vocabulary. I began traveling more frequently under archival pretense, observing outer systems firsthand. What I encountered was not insurrection, but adaptation. On Lothara, local defense councils implemented joint security frameworks modeled after human cooperative doctrine. Imperial insignias remained displayed in government halls, but beside newly adopted civic charters emphasizing citizen representation. On Morvain, tribute processing centers were downsized. Excess resources were invested into education programs developed through human partnerships. No one spoke of leaving the empire. They simply behaved as though the empire was no longer central. The stillness unsettled me more than open warfare would have. War galvanizes loyalty. It sharpens identity. This quiet evolution blurred it. In private, I reviewed long-term stability. We prepared for war. After Jinxel burned, our fleets fortified every major jump corridor. Defense platforms were rearmed. Conscription quotas increased. The capital's orbital ring shimmered with newly activated shield arrays. We expected retaliation. We expected human dreadnoughts emerging from hyperspace in righteous fury. Instead, they sent more hospital ships. At first, we believed it a feint. Intelligence predicted eventual escalation. No species absorbs such destruction without striking back. But escalation never came. Relief convoys multiplied across the Outer Rim. Coordinated humanitarian fleets entered not only Jinxel, but neighboring systems destabilized by refugee influx. Human supply chains expanded with unnerving efficiency. Civilian transports were refitted as evacuation carriers. Independent media networks, many beyond our censorship reach, broadcast continuous testimonies from survivors. We attempted to frame the narrative. Human negligence invited imperial correction, our official channels declared. Unauthorized alliances destabilized regional order. The humans responded not with counteraccusation, but with grief. I watched, unsettled, as Earth's Secretary General stood before a chamber filled with representatives from dozens of species. Behind her flickered images of Jinxel's ruins. "We mourn," she said simply, "not as factions, as lives lost." No condemnation, no threats, only mourning. She read the names of the dead, alien names, one by one. Our propaganda algorithms faltered. Revenge would have validated our doctrine. Anger would have justified further suppression. But sorrow? Sorrow made our strife appear monstrous. Across neutral systems, vigils were held, not in protest of humanity's aggression, but in memory of victims of imperial fire. For centuries, we had maintained moral authority through inevitability. We were strong, therefore our actions were justified. Now, strength looked callous. Compassion looked courageous. Internal dissent intensified. Governors on resource-critical worlds quietly delayed enforcement of increased tribute quotas. Logistical complications, they claimed, infrastructure strain. Military officers requested clarification before executing new intimidation patrols. Some cited civilian safety concerns. Desertions began, not in dramatic mutinies, but in quiet absences. A patrol frigate failing to report for duty, a logistics officer transferring to a neutral trade commission, a squadron commander retiring unexpectedly. Unthinkable once. Now,
explainable. The most disturbing phenomenon, however, was not rebellion. It was silence. No banners of revolution rose above planetary capitals, no fleets defected en masse, there were no dramatic declarations of independence. There was simply withdrawal. Systems initiated administrative restructuring. Tribute shipments were recalculated. Resource allocations were temporarily redirected to local stabilization initiatives. The language was precise, legal, respectful, defiant only in implication. In the corridors of the Capitol, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations ceased when certain officials approached. Data streams were encrypted beyond standard protocol. Young bureaucrats no longer recited imperial doctrine with reflexive conviction. They spoke of efficiency, of sustainability, of long-term resilience. Human vocabulary. I began traveling more frequently under archival pretense, observing outer systems firsthand. What I encountered was not insurrection, but adaptation. On Lothara, local defense councils implemented joint security frameworks modeled after human cooperative doctrine. Imperial insignias remained displayed in government halls, but beside newly adopted civic charters emphasizing citizen representation. On Morvain, tribute processing centers were downsized. Excess resources were invested into education programs developed through human partnerships. No one spoke of leaving the empire. They simply behaved as though the empire was no longer central. The stillness unsettled me more than open warfare would have. War galvanizes loyalty. It sharpens identity. This quiet evolution blurred it. In private, I reviewed long-term stability projections. Our analysts, those not yet dismissed for ideological contamination, presented a chilling assessment. If current trends persist, imperial dependency ratios will fall below sustainable authority thresholds within 10 cycles. Sustainable authority. Even our terminology was changing. Late one rotation, I stood alone in the Grand Archive, staring at a holographic map of imperial territory. For centuries, its borders had glowed uniformly, a testament to consolidated control. Now, faint variations pulsed across the outer rim. Not secession indicators, engagement metrics, mutual aid compacts, cooperative infrastructure exchanges, educational treaties. Human influence did not replace our banner. It coexisted beside it. And that coexistence diluted us. For the first time in my centuries of service, I confronted a thought I had long suppressed. I was not afraid of human.
The ultimatum was inevitable. Empires, when cornered by erosion, attempt to reassert gravity. The emperor summoned every governor, admiral, and sector magistrate to a galaxy-wide broadcast. The throne chamber blazed with ceremonial light. Conquest murals shimmered behind him, ancient victories immortalized in crystal relief. His voice, amplified across thousands of systems, carried the weight of centuries. Humanity's subversive altruism, he declared, is an existential threat to galactic stability. Subversive altruism. The phrase had been crafted by our finest rhetoricians. It sounded clinical, dangerous, infectious. He continued, all cooperative agreements with Earth were to be dissolved immediately, all mutual aid compacts terminated. Systems failing to comply would face eradication. Not sanction, not correction, eradication. The word reverberated like a war drum. For a moment, I felt the old certainty stir. This was the empire I had served, unyielding, decisive, absolute. Fear would surge back into its accustomed channels. Tribute would resume. Doubt would wither. We waited for panic, for desperate withdrawals from human partnerships. Instead, humanity answered with a single broadcast. No fleets arrayed behind their leaders, no displays of weapons or mobilization footage. Just faces, dozens of them. A Virillian agronomist describing restored oceans, a Morvain engineer recounting reactor stabilization training, a Thescan counselor explaining how cooperative trade eliminated famine cycles. species after species speaking not of rebellion, but of improved living conditions, shared governance, and hope. Hope. The word felt dangerously luminous. There was no denunciation of the emperor, no defiance, only gratitude. One elderly representative from Lothara concluded simply, "We are not choosing sides, we are choosing survival together." The broadcast spread faster than our sensors could throttle bandwidth. Independent networks mirrored it across encrypted relays. Even within the capital, junior officials viewed it in private chambers. The emotional impact was devastating, because the testimonials were voluntary, uncoerced. No threat compelled them to speak. No human stood behind them. They stood on their own. In the emergency council that followed, projections filled the chamber in grim statistical cascades. If we executed eradication protocols against non-compliant systems, trade networks reliant on human agricultural modules would collapse. Food shortages would ripple inward. Neutral powers benefiting from Earth's medical technologies might interpret our strike as prelude to broader domination. Coalition backlash probability, 68%. Unified resistance among previously neutral polities, 42% and rising. "Then strike Earth directly," Admiral Corthan insisted. "Decapitate the contagion." Strategic simulations rotated above the table. Earth's defenses were modest compared to our own. Militarily, a decisive strike was feasible. But the consequences: trade collapse across interdependent systems, energy shortages in mid-rim industrial hubs, potential alignment of multiple neutral civilizations under a defensive pact. For the first time in imperial history, total victory carried unacceptable instability risk. Debate raged for 3 cycles. Voices rose, accusation sharpened. The emperor's patience thinned visibly. Then the unthinkable occurred. 3 Outer Rim governors issued public statements. They would not provide ships for the assault. Not delay, not reconsider, refuse. The announcements were carefully worded. They reaffirmed respect for imperial heritage while citing ethical and economic concerns regarding offensive action against Earth. Within hours, 2 mid-rim systems echoed the stance. Our chain of command, once seamless, fractured. Admirals demanded punitive measures against dissenting governors, but deploying fleets to discipline them would further thin forces for the Earth assault. Every decision now weakened another front. I watched the Empire tremble, not from external bombardment, but internal refusal. Obedience once was reflexive. Orders flowed outward, compliance flowed inward. Now, orders met friction, hesitation, calculation. The Emperor convened a final closed session. Only senior command and archival authority were permitted. His gaze swept the chamber, lingering on each of us in turn. If we retreat, we validate their narrative. We concede moral authority. We demonstrate fear. Silence. He was correct. Yet to proceed risked cascading destabilization. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if he might choose restraint. He did not. The assault will proceed, with or without unanimous participation. The words felt heavier than any weapon. Mobilization orders were transmitted. Remaining loyal fleets began assembling at designated jump coordinates. Supply convoys rerouted, weapon systems primed. Across the galaxy, reactions varied, some supportive, many apprehensive, several openly condemning. The human response? Silence. No defensive mobilization displays, no inflammatory rhetoric, only a brief communique from Earth's leadership. We remain open to dialogue. Our ships will not fire first. Not fire first. The phrase unsettled me more than threats would have. Because if they refused to fire first, then we would bear sole responsibility for what followed. As High Archivist, I was tasked with recording the formal execution directive. My appendages hovered over the console longer than protocol allowed. This was no longer a punitive strike against a peripheral colony.
This was a declaration that would define an era. I finalized the entry. Across secure channels, countdown protocols initiated. Fleet commanders confirmed readiness, jump coordinates synchronized, T-12 standard hours. Within the capital, tension coiled like a drawn blade. Outside it, countless systems watched, some with fear, some with hope, some with quiet calculation. I stood before the grand viewport overlooking our orbital armada, warships aligned in precise formation, engines humming with restrained annihilation. For centuries, such a sight would have filled me with pride. Now, I felt the Empire balanced on a precipice of its own making. The assault order had been given, the countdown had begun, and somewhere beyond our sensor range, a species that called compassion strength was waiting to see what we would choose to become.
I believed I understood collapse. I had studied extinct empires, those shattered by invasion, consumed by civil war, undone by famine or plague. I did not understand refusal. The fleet assembled at the designated jump point in flawless formation. Thousands of warships drifted in lethal symmetry, hulls reflecting distant starlight like a constellation forged from iron. Carrier groups aligned, dreadnought cannons charged to standby levels, targeting matrices locked onto pre-calculated insertion vectors toward Earth. The countdown ticked across every command display. T-300 seconds. I stood in the central operations chamber beside the Emperor. His silhouette was rigid against the holographic projection of our armada. "Prepare for coordinated jump," he commanded. Acknowledgements rippled outward. Then, a hesitation. Battlegroup Aurinth did not confirm. A minor delay, perhaps. Communication lag, sensor recalibration. "Repeat command," barked Admiral Corthan. Static. Then, the face of Commander Relvek filled the central display. His uniform insignia gleamed beneath cold bridge lighting. His voice, when it came, was steady. "Battlegroup Aurinth will not execute the assault order." Silence swallowed the chamber. "Clarify," the Admiral demanded. "We will not fire upon Earth," Relvek repeated. "Our oath was to defend the Empire, not initiate catastrophic destabilization. We decline." Decline. An Admiral's hand twitched toward emergency override protocols. Before he could speak again, 2 additional battle groups transmitted identical confirmations. "Stand down." Refusal. The words spread across secured channels like fracture lines racing through glass. The Emperor's voice dropped into a register I had only heard once before, during a planetary extermination decree centuries prior. "Relvek," he said softly, "you are in open mutiny." Relvek did not flinch. "We are in open conscience." The transmission terminated. Within seconds, enforcement directives were issued. Loyalist cruisers were ordered to surround the dissenting battle groups. They did not move. Or, rather, they moved slowly, hesitantly. Weapons remained powered down. Civil conflict flickered in potential. Targeting systems painted Allied hulls with preliminary warnings. But no one fired. No captain wished to be first. And across the formation, something impossible unfolded. Defection notices began transmitting, not as threats, but as statements of regret. "Apologies to the Imperial Command, we cannot comply." Respectfully declining participation. "May history judge us." One commander transmitted directly to Earth on open frequency. "We stand down. We seek no hostilities." The message was not intercepted in time. It was seen. Everywhere. The Emperor ordered arrests. Security frigates accelerated toward dissenting vessels, then slowed. One turned back entirely. Chain of command, once unbreakable, had become negotiable. I watched the armada fracture without a single shot fired. Then humanity spoke. Not to our admirals, not to our emperor, to our citizens. The broadcast bypassed military encryption through civilian networks. It appeared simultaneously on commercial relays, educational forums, private communication arrays. The human Secretary General stood alone, no flags, no fleets. "To the citizens of the Empire," she began, "we do not seek your destruction." There was no triumph in her tone. "We understand fear. We understand uncertainty. We will not exploit division. We ask only this: choose dialogue over violence. Choose. Not rebel, not overthrow. Choose. We are prepared to meet your leaders in peace. We are prepared to withdraw from any system that requests it. We will not fire first." The message was brief, measured, devastating, because it offered an exit without humiliation, an alternative without annihilation. They did not seek to replace us. They sought to transform the framework itself. In that moment, the final illusion shattered. We had told ourselves humanity was undermining us to seize control. But control was never their objective. Autonomy was. Across the Empire, planetary councils convened emergency sessions. Civilian networks erupted, not with riot, but with debate. Within days, formal votes were scheduled. Independence referendums, not rebellions, ballots. The legitimacy we had claimed for centuries, rooted in inevitability and strength, was suddenly subject to consent. Consent. The concept felt alien in my mind. Core worlds, worlds that had never known anything but imperial governance, announced referendums of their own. The Emperor denounced them as illegal. But legality requires enforcement, and enforcement requires loyalty. Loyalty was dispersing like vapor under rising heat. I traveled to Vethra Prime, the oldest core world beyond the capital, under archival authority to observe proceedings. I expected unrest. Instead, I found lines. Citizens queuing peacefully outside civic halls awaiting their turn to cast votes. Imperial banners still hung from administrative towers, but beside them flew newly designed planetary emblems. When results were announced, there was no riot, no cheering mobs, only a collective exhale. Vethra Prime would transition to autonomous governance within a cooperative interstellar framework, not under Earth, not under us, beside others. I stood in the central plaza as, for the first time in recorded history, the Imperial banner was lowered on a core world. No siege, no bombardment, just choice. The fabric descended slowly, caught briefly in the wind, then folded by careful hands. I felt something fracture within me, not anger, not even grief. Recognition. Back at the jump point, the assault on Earth dissolved in stages. More battle groups powered down weapons. Several disengaged entirely, returning to their home sectors. Finally, Fleet Command issued a revised status update. Operational viability insufficient. Assault suspended. Not canceled by decree. Abandoned by absence. The Emperor remained upon the command dais long after the chamber emptied. His empire still existed on maps. His fleets still floated in orbit. But authority unchosen is authority undone. I returned to the Grand Archive and began recording what I once would have considered impossible. The Empire had not been conquered. It had been declined. And as planetary referendums multiplied across the stars, I understood the depth of humanity's strategy. They had not destroyed our throne. They had rendered it optional. The countdown to Earth reached 0. No jump occurred. Only silence. And in that silence, we heard the sound of an empire letting go.
Empires are loud when they rise. They are unbearably quiet when they fall. The tribute convoys stopped first. One by one, scheduled shipments failed to arrive at the capital's docking arrays. Automated reminders were transmitted. No hostile replies returned, only polite notices of sovereign fiscal reallocation. Without tribute, the imperial treasury began to hollow. Subsidies to core world industries were suspended. Defense contracts defaulted. Shipyards idled, their skeletal frames half-assembled in orbit like abandoned carcasses. Bureaucracies dissolved in stages. Ministries responsible for resource extraction found themselves without resources to extract. Administrators resigned under the guise of transitional restructuring. Entire departments merged, then vanished. Aristocratic houses, once radiant in ceremonial splendor, liquidated assets and fled to private enclaves beyond former borders. Their titles meant little in systems that no longer recognized inherited dominance. Markets reorganized with startling efficiency. Cooperative trade networks, modeled after human frameworks, expanded across former imperial lanes. Decentralized resource exchanges replaced centralized quotas. Data flowed openly. Contracts were negotiated horizontally rather than vertically. There was chaos. Supply chains faltered temporarily. Currency valuations fluctuated violently. On several worlds, brief civil disturbances erupted as old power structures resisted dissolution. But there was no apocalypse, no galaxy-wide famine, no descent into barbarism. Human stabilization teams arrived, not in armored divisions, but in advisory delegations. Engineers, mediators, logistics coordinators. They entered systems only upon formal invitation. They refused territorial control, refused even permanent bases. "We're here to assist transition," their envoys repeated. "Govern yourselves." On Morvain, I observed a human delegation declining authority offered by a provisional council. "You should draft your own charter," said one advisor gently. "We will review it if you wish, but it must be yours." Such restraint was incomprehensible to our former doctrine. Power once available was to be seized. Yet they declined it. The capital itself dimmed. Without tributary energy inflows, the orbital ring reduced illumination cycles. Grand avenues, once crowded with diplomats and merchants, grew sparse. Statues commemorating ancient conquests loomed over plazas where citizens now debated constitutional frameworks instead of imperial expansion. I requested a final private audience with the emperor. Protocol, once labyrinthine, had eroded. Access was granted without delay. He stood alone in the throne chamber when I entered. The banners of 1,000 worlds still hung from vaulted arches, but many of those worlds had already voted to remove them. He appeared smaller, not physically diminished, but unmoored. "You have come to record the end," he said without turning. "I have come to record truth," I replied. He faced me then, and in his gaze I saw not fury, but exhaustion. "How," he asked quietly, "did they defeat us without war?" The question reverberated through the cavernous chamber. For centuries we had equated defeat with annihilation, cities reduced to ash, fleets shattered in open combat. But our fleets still existed, our cities still stood, and yet we were undone. "We built dependence," I said carefully, "and fear." He did not interrupt. "We centralized resources so that systems required us to function. We enforced loyalty through scarcity and intimidation. It endured until alternatives appeared." I gestured toward the distant stars beyond the chamber's great viewport. "They built resilience, local autonomy, trust networks that functioned without coercion. When pressure came, when we threatened annihilation, our structure relied on obedience. And theirs," he asked, "relied on choice." Silence settled between us. When the assault order was given, we assumed compliance would follow because it always had. But compliance born of fear fractures under moral strain. Humanity had not shattered our fleets. They had offered our subjects a future where fleets were unnecessary. The emperor exhaled slowly. "We could have adapted," he murmured. "Yes," I agreed, "but adaptation requires relinquishing supremacy." And supremacy had been our identity.
Outside the chamber, the final tallies accumulated. More than 70% of former imperial systems had ratified autonomous governance within cooperative interstellar frameworks. The remainder were in transition. No coalition had formed to conquer us. No armada hovered to enforce surrender. There would be no surrender ceremony, no humiliating treaty signed beneath foreign banners. Just conclusion. Within days, a formal proposal circulated among remaining core administrators: dissolution of the Imperial Charter. The document was concise, clinical. It acknowledged the Empire no longer possessed sufficient consensual authority to govern its constituent systems. It recommended orderly archival closure and transition to regional autonomy agreements. I was tasked with preparing the historical codex entry. On the appointed day, the throne chamber was nearly empty. No cheering crowds, no enemy delegations. Only a handful of senior officials and myself. The Emperor placed his signet upon the dissolution document. His appendage trembled just slightly. "It is done," he said. The charter that had governed 1,000 worlds for centuries was rescinded not by conquest, but by recognition. I archived the document into the Grand Record. Timestamp sealed. Era concluded. As I exited the chamber, workers were already removing banners from upper galleries. They handled them with care, not as relics of shame, but as artifacts of history. Outside, the capital's skyline shimmered under reduced illumination. Yet in the distance, new signal arrays, independent, cooperative, flickered to life. The Empire had not been destroyed in flame. It had been outgrown. And as I recorded the final annotation in our archives, I understood the full magnitude of humanity's quiet revolution. They did not conquer territory. They expanded possibility. And when possibility spreads, dominion contracts. The throne room doors closed behind me for the last time. Not with a crash, but with a whisper.